Greetings, Kindred. I am Voivode Maquette, and welcome back to our World of Darkness. Today is the 8th episode of the Thicker Than Water recap, and we'll be going over chapters 2 and 3 of Project Ragnarok, which is a story of my own creation. Project Ragnarok is based off of the consequences of what happened after the events of Styx Bones, which is the module found in Cults of the Blood Gods, where that story does leave off quite abruptly. We do have to realize that life goes on, and where we have skipped a month of time in between the storylines, the organization known as CERT, or the Special Emergency Reaction Team, are not going to just stop investigating when a serial killer stops killing for a short amount of time. They're going to continue investigating. They are going to try to stop a resurgence of those killings. And we also have reason to believe that CERT is not as mundane of an organization as thought. Mason, the prince's child and the sheriff's hound, believes that CERT has connections with the Second Inquisition, and Mason has been missing for about half a week. The night before our story tonight takes place, Colin Griffin was meant to have a meeting with the Baron of Portland's Anarchs. It's soon found out also that he was meant to have a meeting with the Prince. The characters were then made aware that the Prince and the Baron were in fact one and the same, that Merrick had been playing both sides of the fence for reasons yet unknown, but he had been keeping the peace and making sure that the active fighting that is happening in multiple Camarilla cities all over the world was not bleeding into the streets of Portland. Now, it was agreed on the morning before, as the sun was beginning to show signs in the sky, that they would meet again. They would come together the next night and discuss a plan of how exactly they were going to handle this situation. They were going to meet back up at the Rose Gardens, which is just a stone's throw away from where CERT itself is holding its base at the Olympic Park. At this point, Damien is unstaked by his sire Deacon. It turns out that he's been staked this entire month, and that's why he did not attend the meeting the night before. Unfortunately, we also don't have Tinia this week. Her player had a prior engagement, so the excuse for Tinia not being there tonight is she is meeting with the Hecata to see if they would be willing to help with these events and try to bring an end to them all, given their involvement in what started this whole thing. Now, Deacon unstaked Damien, but he didn't explain everything to him. He explained that Mason, who is a friend of Damien in life, is suspected to have been taken. He explained that Colin Griffin definitely was, and also explained where they were. Damien finds out later that the Prince and the Baron are the same, and has a understandable moment of confusion, but it did bring about a very comical shut up Damien montage, which was very similar to watching The Big Lebowski with the whole shut up Donnie situation. The player characters eventually all make it to the Rose Gardens to meet up with Merrick to discuss the options that they have with dealing with this situation. Obviously, this is something that needs to be handled quickly, but given the fact that we could very well be dealing with hunters with police contacts, it also needs to be handled very delicately. Sam, of course, decides that he's not going to show up because he has better things to do, but with some lying about drugs being present at the meeting, he does end up eventually showing up. Disappointed, obviously, because there are no drugs like he was promised. At this time, they begin going over their options. How exactly can they get in there if CERT is in fact hunters? Now, there's no doubt in their mind that they are dealing with hunters, or at least people who may have stumbled upon the fact that Kindred exist. Because you can't have someone captive. You can't have a kindred captive that long without realizing exactly what they are. And Mason's been missing for several days, and Colin has been missing for a day, and he seems to have been specifically hunted down and taken. Now, the idea of creating a false murder scene that resembles the attacks from Styx Bones is brought up. The idea of capturing one of the CERT members for interrogation also is brought up. But the fact that the sheriff and the keeper of Elysium are now also investigating the situation makes things a little bit harder to deal with, because now, without the keeper of Elysium or the sheriff in the Elysium, it means that the seneschal is the only one left to pick up the slack. And having Anton Dracon being in charge of the kindred of the city unchecked is not really the best thing that Merrick can think of. Not trusting your own seneschal is definitely an unfavorable position to be in. Now, aside from all this, there's the idea of what exactly to do with the hunters once you do get inside of the outpost. Wholesale slaughter is obviously right off the table. We can't do anything that's going to cause more suspicion. Merrick has already begun the paperwork to make it look like reports have been pushed through to need maintenance on gas lines underneath the park and the buildings and the like, but actually blowing the park up with making sure that all CERT members are inside is a little bit more difficult. They'd actually have to get in, get their people out, set something, get the CERT members back in, and blow it up. So obviously this is going to be a little bit more complicated than they thought. Damien offered the idea of using his contacts in the military to act more as a distraction to keep the CERT members busy and possibly pick off any who are trying to escape from whatever attack they do decide on. Sam suggests finding a way to defund them, like that's going to cause an immediate effect, but possibly trying to get them to go on strike or something like that, having them protested by local social justice groups and the like. And where all this stuff might come in handy over time, handling it right away and getting into this fast is not exactly what that is going to be capable of. And the idea of having Mason and Colin sit in there that long, being subject to who knows what experiments, is not something the prince is willing to do. Not to mention, if this is in fact a group of hunters, then they're just using CERT as a cover to perform their hunts. Defunding them might not really help the situation. Now, during these suggestions, the worst one that the prince heard was from Damien, and that was actually using his mercenary contacts to actually start a false flag event or a fake terrorist attack in the area to try to get CERT to go there. When Merrick mentioned the fact that this was the worst idea, Deacon then said right up there with picking a fight with Redclave, where Merrick jumped to bat for Damien, that he held his own, that Redclave had gone after him, and that he did not do anything wrong in that situation. Deacon, now realizing that he may have staked his child for no reason whatsoever. But while there was the discussion of why Redclave is allowed to exist, because it is then brought out that he was a member of the Sabbat before the Beckoning started claiming all the Sabbat members, Merrick tells him that he had claimed Anarch, and that the Anarchs have even more twisted, fucked up politics than the Camarilla do in these modern nights, unfortunately. He then goes on to say that even though he's happy to have Theobel joining the Anarchs, which then triggers Damien to realize that this prince is supporting the Anarchs in some fashion. When Theobald joined the Anarchs, he brought a whole bunch of organizational tactics that was not needed in the Anarchs, and that the Anarchs barons now act as if they're Camarilla princes in their own right, with smaller territories. Merrick then goes on to express that the balancing act that he's doing is to try to keep Billy Smith from becoming prince, because his first action of prince is to ignite the war between the Anarchs and the Camarilla within Portland, and that many kindred are going to suffer if he himself becomes prince. And he also plans on bringing a chantry into the city, which Merrick has worked very, very hard at making sure that the Camarilla do not have that thaumaturgical bastion in his territory. Now, as the conversation has switched to politics, Sam starts to get a little bored and decides that he's going to excuse himself. He says he'll be right back, and he leaves. He has no intention on being right back. He gets in his car and he drives over to the Olympic Park, finds a nearby building, climbs up to the roof, and starts scouting out. The next stakeout. Damien was the first. This is the next one. And as he starts to gather more and more information about them, while on site, Sam begins to study their patterns. He checks to see what their patrol lines are within the Olympic Park. He hacks into their servers and finds the number of wireless access points, how many cameras there might be, and various informations on top of that. But then he has to take some time trying to figure out exactly how to get into the system itself. When the rest of the coterie realizes that Sam is not coming back like he said he was going to, they decide that they're going to figure out where exactly he had gone. When they text him and he lets them know that he's on site observing Cert in their natural environment, they decide they're going to meet up with him. They hop into Deacon's car and drive on over. Now, Deacon didn't go with them. Deacon stays behind with the prince. But as they pull up to the area and they find the building that Sam is stationed on, Damien decides that he's going to go up there with them. Dawn stays in the car and waits. Damien goes up to the fire escape and very noisily makes his way up to the roof, where he alerts a hidden observer that there are others in the area. Around the time that Damien gets up to the roof, Sam realizes that someone is now monitoring their phones. That being in the vicinity of the CERT area has opened them up to a network where people can listen in on them. Anything that is spoken or anything that is texted back and forth on their phones is being sent directly to the CERT server. As the frustration of the situation starts building, Sam starts to feel this inner need to own something that's going on. He's having a hard time breaking into the security of this place, and Damien showing up just kind of sets him over the edge, and this inner covetedness, this need to add something to his personal hoard kicks in. Sam doubles down his efforts a little bit and busts through a little bit more of their security and finds several files on their network. One containing all the information on the murder victims from the month before. Another being marked as an evidence lockup, and one called Project Ragnarok, which catches his attention. When he goes into there, he finds information that he can't quite understand. Not that it's encrypted, but that it seems like nonsense on a subject 1 and a subject 2, which highly suggests that they are keeping Colin and Mason alive for testing purposes. Further going into their system, he's able to find their security, and is able to find that not only do they have cameras on site, they also have AR cameras and something known as a BB camera. Not 100% sure exactly what that means, but they are able to find out that it is a reverse infrared camera. Instead of picking up on the heat signatures of individuals, it picks up on the lack of heat signature of people. This pretty much confirms their thought process that the Second Inquisition might be involved in this. But the idea of perhaps if you use the Blush of Life, you might be able to trick those cameras and get past them. At this point, unfortunately, when Sam mentions the fact that Blush of Life might be able to get past this, Damien has no idea what he's talking about. Apparently, this neonate Lasombra, his elder sire, never really taught him how to blend back in with humans. So Sam starts to give Damien a little bit of a crash course on how to actually survive in a world where the masquerade is important. During this conversation, Dawn had made her way up the fire escape silently in Offuscate and goes right in between the two Kindred who are discussing this whole thing, Sam and Damien, and says, "Hey guys, what you doing?" Scaring the living shit out of the both of them. Now, as soon as Dawn arrives, the conversation turns to feeding between her and Sam, because both of them have not been doing very well when it comes to rouse checks this evening. Dawn, however, after talking to Sam about what the barracks situation is, decides that she really wants to get inside those barracks and feed on some of those CERT members, but decides to take it an extra step forward and push her luck to commune with her deities, as she puts it, or to invoke the power of precognition and see what she can learn from it. Now, in her mind, Dawn sees this symbol, which she can't quite place. She doesn't know it from her limited occult studies that she has practiced, but she also gets the word antigen in her head. Again, not fully comprehending on what's going on, but while she's discussing what these things might be with Sam and trying to validate what she's doing, because when she says, "Oh, I'm talking to my deities," he just sort of brushes her off, seeing her as just a new age flake. And Damien starts to gather all of his supplies together. The ID, the watch of the public defender, whose spirit he has the ability to capture because he has a fetter for that person. Unfortunately, the ceremony calls for one other thing: to smear blood, vitae to be specific, on the fetter. And again, Sam and Dawn are not doing the best when it comes to hunger. Sam makes his check and he's fine, but Dawn barely holds it together. Not quite a frenzy, but more of another flash of insight. She smells the hot desert sands. She hears hurricanes roaring in her head. She gets the feeling of being attacked on all sides, but knowing that she can handle it because she is the Lord of the Tricksters. And she lunges out of Offuscate and towards the open wound cut onto Damien's hand. Now, Damien is swift and he moves out of the way. He pulls a gun, and proving that she's not fully in frenzy herself, Dawn also pulls a weapon, given to her by Damien himself, actually. Ironic. And this standoff gets a little tricky as Damien starts to summon shadows to trip her feet up. But as that happens, Dawn suddenly finds herself bound and hitting the ground hard as Patricia Black steps out of the shadows, having fired a bolo at her, confining her, sending her into a complete frenzy. With Dawn pretty much completely lost in this frenzy at this point, Patricia Black walks over to her slowly, kneels down, and cuts herself open, dripping some of her own blood into the frenzied vampire's open mouth, enough to fill her to a satisfactory level. She then questions the neonates why exactly they're here, why are they involved in this, and exactly what they plan to accomplish. With them explaining things for themselves, she decides that it is time to take this to a higher degree. The coterie has told her now that they believe that the actual Second Inquisition is involved in all of this, and from her point of view, it is now time to bring in higher-ups who would be better suited to handle this situation. This is completely opposite of what Merrick wants to accomplish. Being able to keep things in-house is safer for the way he is running things. With the information gathered from the coterie, Patricia suggests that they leave, and she is going to start rallying the city's council members together to have an organized meeting on everything that's going on. With that, the neonates decide to reconvene at Damien's nightclub Afterlife and refill on blood before they head back to the Rose Gardens to let Merrick and Deacon know exactly what they came up with. Now, while that's happening, however, Deacon and Merrick have been sitting at the Rose Gardens alone in probably the longest, most awkward silence ever. That is until Merrick decides to break the silence and let Deacon know that many of the anarchs in the city believe that Damien has strong anarch leanings, and asks him exactly what he thinks about that. Deacon's answer surprises Merrick greatly when he says as long as he's not involved with the Sabbat in any way. After a little bit of prodding, Merrick is able to realize that the only reason Deacon himself chose the Camarilla is because his sire chose the Camarilla, and it was the best option at the time given the formation of the Sword of Cain. Pushing on the subject further, Merrick tries to inquire whether or not Deacon himself might be interested in the Anarch movement, a more of a free life than the Camarilla has to offer, and it's not hard to tell that Deacon himself might actually be interested in the offer. But with the seriousness of this political conversation hanging over their heads, Deacon does confide in Merrick one other thing, that he himself is beginning to feel the call of the beckoning, and he's not really sure how much longer he can hold out. He's pretty sure that his sire has already succumbed to the call. Interrupting this conversation, however, Merrick's small, outdated flip phone chirps. Looking at it, he lets Deacon know that he has just received a text message from Jacob Monroth stating that Patricia Black is pushing for Archon involvement in this, that there is now confirmed presence of the Second Inquisition within the city, and that Patricia is at least demanding that Merrick take this to the council to debate whether or not it should in fact be taken to the higher-ups of the Camarilla. Merrick opens up to Deacon at this point, explaining that bringing the greater Camarilla presence into the city would be disastrous, that keeping the murders under control without their involvement was hard enough, but given his failing support within the city itself, that the next person to take reins of the city would most likely be Billy Smith, who has the backing of the majority of the Primogen Council at the moment. Smith, who already has great dark designs for the city and what he plans on doing with it. And the Camarilla might find James Merrick, child of the former Prince Joseph Barrett, unfit to rule. If Smith does become Prince, we are looking at a massive attack on the Anarch community, which could very well instigate an influx of Anarchs from California, rushing in from the Free States to defend their brothers and sisters in the cause. Deacon is concerned that Sabbat turned Anarch may also end up flooding into the streets. Merrick goes on to explain to Deacon what exactly Redclave's presence means in the city. That this upstart ex-Sabbat claiming Anarch and his pack, or gang, as they're calling themselves now, have claimed Fulton. That Redclave is calling himself the Baron of Fulton. And going to war with him is not something Merrick is ready to do. The idea that Redclave was a thorn in his sire's side, and the fact that if Joseph Barrett, the admired Ventru, could not handle this city gangrel, how could he? However, if news that these, might as well just call them still Sabbat vampires, have taken over a portion of their city, forcing Camarilla Kindred, as well as several Anarchs, to change their domains, to give up personal territory, to not be around him, Archons could very well be called in on this. We're dealing with territory being lost due to a militant, angry ex-Sabbat Anarch. We're dealing with a hunter situation. We're dealing with the stretching of the Masquerade so thin due to something that the Hecata had caused and that the Anarchs were involved in. And now this sympathetic prince of the Camarilla, who seems to be doing everything he can to stop an all-out war with the Camarilla's enemies. Merrick is definitely losing the support of those that he was hoping for. Eventually, our coterie returns to the Rose Gardens, back with Deacon and Merrick, and they explain everything that has happened, including the fact that Dawn is now bloodbound to the Keeper of Elysium. Bloodbound to an Assamite. The plane has crashed into the goddamn mountain. Things are not going well. However, with the information they have, they do believe that they might be able to use what's going on to their own advantage. Merrick will follow the advice of the Keeper and gather the council to discuss exactly how they should handle this. But while he is doing that, our coterie is going to be waging a full-out assault on the CERT base. Deacon is going to be with Merrick as moral support, showing that this elder is backing the prince. The idea that Merrick comes up with is that first thing after the sun sets, the meeting will begin. It will not actually begin until after Deacon has arrived. Therefore, the Kindred are first disorientated with how groggy they are, due to the fact that the meeting was called so early. Everybody's going to want to be there due to the fact of the situation at hand. Deacon is not going to show up until he can. He's told to take his time by Merrick. This will cause aggravation in the ranks, and it's more likely that the Kindred in the city will begin infighting with each other before the meeting even truly begins. A distraction is going to be planned, using the mercenary help of Damien's contacts. The distraction in place, a good number of the CERT operatives off of the base. They are going to go in and try to get Colin and Mason out as stealthily as possible. Then, the idea of planting explosives close enough to make a big mess and make it look like subjects 1 and 2 of Project Ragnarok were caught in the destruction. Vampires, of course, leave nothing but ash when dealing with fire. This was the plan, and the Kindred then go on their own way into Chapter 3. Naming a killer. Chapter 3 takes place on the same night. They're standing outside the Rose Gardens as everyone is beginning to figure out exactly what the next step is. There are several hours left until dawn, and more planning for the assault the next night can be taking place. When they step outside, Damien requests that Dawn give him his gun back, the one that she pulled on him earlier, and she tries to persuade him to let her keep it. This gun, however, does hold some special importance to Damien, being given to him by one of his touchstones, and she hands it back to him, telling him that he'll regret this, just as she falls to the ground in a slight convulsion, her nose bleeding, and a vision sets in. She has the scent of freshly turned soil filling her nostrils. She can see the moon rise, and then she sees hands clawing their way through the soil to the surface. She tries to explain this to the group as she comes to, but no one really listens to her and writes off the idea of visions of zombies as being ridiculous, considering how much necromantic trouble they've run into recently. I really don't understand why they wouldn't outright believe her at first. The conversation just continues to go as they try to figure out what exactly they need to be doing. Sam starts to look online for the layout of Olympic Park to try to figure out where the best place to attack would be. Damien suggests obviously the server room needs to be where we need to go. If there's any information, we need to get it. Dawn thinks that it's a bad idea to actually go back until the next night, due to the fact that the Keeper of Elysium had already caught them. And as Sam then goes into asking Damien about how wraiths could be used in this, going back to what they had tried to do just an hour or so before, Dawn is flooded with a high-pitched sound in her ears that's very uncomfortable but seems to be beckoning her on. Almost like a dog whistle that's coming in 3 sharp bursts from the north. Explaining what's going on, the rest of the coterie just completely ignores Dawn with everything that she's experiencing. They head back into Deacon's car and they drive to Afterlife, where Damien again summons the Wraith and asks them to perform some reconnaissance on the CERT base. While this is happening, however, they do notice on security cameras that there are CERT operatives in the club, and they're slowly issuing people out, clearing the bar. After completing the ceremony, Damien starts to go over the security footage for his club and finds that throughout this past month there have been several CERT operatives that have been coming into his club on a periodic basis, investigating the area, and most likely trying to find Damien himself. Dawn again gets this dizzying feeling in her head and gets the sense of wild animals who are running towards potent vitae. While Dawn is having yet another vision, Sam discovers that the room has been bugged and someone's listening in on these conversations that they're having. And just as the realization hits, there's a knock on the door and Damien's manager speaks through the closed door, letting him know that there are officers here to speak to him. Dawn retreats into Obfuscate. Sam and Deacon head into the basement, which leads to a tunnel into the sewers to try to escape. The CERT officers insist that the door opens. Damien lets them in, and 6 officers walk in with heavy weaponry, wearing full armor. They inform him that he is either coming with them, or they are going to shoot him to dust. But either way, he's going. This is about the time all hell breaks loose. The CERT operatives asks where the other 3 are, inferring that Dawn, Deacon, and Sam should be in the room also. 4 of the operatives head down the stairs following Sam and Deacon, while 2 stay with their guns firmly aimed at Damien behind his desk. There's a flurry of violence all at once. Dawn, using her art of perception manipulation, as I like to say, creates a false explosion in the hallway, causing 2 of the operatives to trip down the stairs and fall down. Deacon jumps at the opportunity to dominate one of the CERT members to attack his friends as Sam runs down the tunnel, escaping into the sewers. The man gets up and starts to open fire on the other 3 officers, killing 2. The survivor pulls out a grenade and throws it towards Deacon, who's sitting in the opening to the tunnel. The explosion goes off, killing the 2 men and causing a collapse of the tunnel, which lands on Deacon. forcing him into torpor. While all this is going on, Damien reaches for one of the CERT operatives, who uses a taser baton to shock Damien down as Dawn pops out of Obfuscate to attack another, receiving a shotgun blast to the chest. Damien also gets shot, but uses the confusion to use his arms of Aramane to trip up the CERT operative, giving him the ability to shoot at one and then jump on the other who was attacking Dawn and snap his neck. They feed. They check and see that there are several more operatives holding off not just customers but also media. Now, while this is all going on, Dawn is fighting with herself on whether or not she should diablerize Deacon Royce. This would have been a very interesting turn of events. But then again, the smell that she's been picking up faintly all night, the smell that has been haunting her premonitions, seems to be calling her north. And it seems to be even stronger than this torpid elder. Dawn makes her way outside, back in Obfuscate, and slips past the crowd and off into the distance. Damien, on the other hand, gets up to the roof and is able to use his vampiric gifts to get to the next building over and travel rooftop to safety. Unfortunately, that's not exactly where things end. Shortly after the event, the news outlets light up. The three-faced killer has been identified. During a routine questioning, Damien Hargrave, owner of the Afterlife nightclub, attacked and killed 6 CERT members and ran off into the night. He's been identified. He's being hunted. Now, while all this is going on, the local Camarilla, however, did find out that there was trouble happening at Afterlife. The Seneschal, Anton Dracon, and several of the Bruja for the Camarilla make their way over to Afterlife, and with some slick uses of Dominate and Presence, are able to disperse the crowd, getting in and finding Deacon buried under the rubble. These neonates left the biggest piece of evidence that Kindred exists in the hands of CERT, a torpid elder. After they regroup at the Rose Gardens, they decide that it's probably a good idea to head back to Afterlife to get Deacon. They steal a van to try to transport the elder. They get about 3 blocks from the club and decide to go the rest of the way through the sewer tunnels. But when they get there, they find that Deacon is already being dug out by a couple of the Bruja, Rhino and Marco. Rhino is a quiet type, you could say, with a very large scar across his throat, and Marco's more tech savvy than most. Billy Smith and Anton oversee the work as the 2 Bruja are doing their best in uncovering the torpid elder. When they do get him up, Damien tries to claim him, and they let him know right then and there that he's not even released and has no rights to anything. They take him, put him in a car, and drive off. When Damien follows, he's led to the warehouse district, where he is quickly closed off by a fence and not allowed to accompany what is going on with his sire. The plan that James Merrick and Deacon Royce had come up with is quickly falling apart. At this point, Dawn is finally able to talk Sam into going north, to follow the scent of blood she's been picking up on the air, to follow the sharp bursts of whistling that she's been hearing. And now a gong sound. As they drive north, Sam is in complete denial that they're going to find anything. But then he starts seeing figures jumping rooftop to rooftop. Crazed, frenzied figures running through the streets, all heading north. He tries to get their attention, and they look back at him, but they lose interest quickly and continue along their way. Until, as they go north to the point where they're approaching the Willamette River, leading into an old shipyard, Sam starts hearing the gong, with a banging on metal, actually. That's where they find 2 Kindred, sitting on top of a shipping container. Music playing on a radio. One of the Kindred is banging his foot against the side of the container as he's pouring a jar of precious, sweet-smelling vitae over the edge into the entrance. These crazed kindred are rushing into the container as the kindred who's kicking the side of the container from the roof is blowing a dog whistle. After all of the targets are inside, they jump down and quickly close the shipping container when they notice that they're being watched by Don and Sam. One of them, a long-haired, covering his face, black duster-wearing individual, holding a large book, says that they need to go now. But the other says we can't go anywhere until after the train gets here. They're waiting. Don and Sam go up and talk to them, the one being massively anti-social, but the other more interested in meeting others. He introduces himself as Maquette, and the other is his brother Wes. They are not related. Wes has a thick Russian accent and has no patience for anything that's going on, while Maquette seems to be more entertained with anything and is willing to answer whatever questions that the pair seem to ask him. What is he doing? Obviously, he's rounding up frenzied kindred. He explains to them quickly that when the Sabbat decided that they were going to be leaving the area, a lot of them performed what's known as shovel parties, where they make shock troops. They bash humans over the head, turn them into vampires, and bury them alive, so that when they have to dig themselves out of their own grave, their humanity is stripped away in the process. The hope was that these shovelheads would cause problems for the local Camarilla, and what Wes and Maquette are doing are traveling the country and rounding up as many of these as possible. They're instigating their rise and forcing them to come with them, using elder's blood given to them by their sire, and also the Prince of Washington, D.C., Marcus Vitel. They've been charged with gathering these kindred to see how many of them still have humanity themselves, and they are going to take them back to Washington so that they can be brought back to who they actually are and become subjects to the independent prince, Marcus Vitel. This intrigues Sam and Dawn. The idea of going to a city that's not influenced by the Camarilla or the Anarchs. The idea that there's a prince out there that doesn't bend a knee to either organization. As they come a little bit closer, Maquette looks over at Sam and says, you need a little bit of practice in what you're doing, and points out the fact that he's been using vicissitude on himself to make himself more attractive. He says that he did a good job. However, there's a little bit of a fingerprint on your cheek, and that can be avoided. And he just starts discussing these things. Dawn has no idea what's going on. She understands that Sam has become more attractive, but what that actually means, she has no idea. When Maquette says, no, it's very easy to do it with yourself, and starts pulling his own flesh outward, she needs to be calmed down because she didn't even realize Sam could do that sort of thing. With everything that's going on, Dawn is a little bit more loose-lipped than she should be, and actually basically explains what's been going on this night and how they need to be careful due to the fact that there are hunters in the area, which piques Maquette's interest. The idea of being involved in some type of hunter siege seems more like a game to him than anything else. He writes down his phone number, gives it to Dawn, and tells her to please give him a call if she does need his help with anything. He'll be happy to. But when the news of what happened to Deacon comes to him, he says that he can help. The vitae that they're using to draw in these wild, frenzied kindred could possibly be used to rise Deacon if his generation is adequate to do it. At this point, he reaches into a bag, pulls out a mason jar, and fills it with some of the vitae from the jar. Closes it off and hands it over to Dawn. She asks what the catch is, and he says, "This is just for you to wake them up. We've got plenty of this stuff." This is the first interaction they've had with Kindred, who are not trying to get something from them. And they decide, since the sun is going to be coming up soon, that it's time for them to go. Maquette lets them know that he's looking forward to hearing from them. And on the way back to their havens, driving in Sam's car, Sam and Dawn get into a little altercation of who's going to keep the vitae. Sam's afraid that Dawn, in her newly acquired bloodlust, is going to drink it, and they're not going to be able to wake up Deacon. Dawn and Sam get into an altercation before Sam realizes that this is dumb to be fighting like this in a car. Not only are they going to get into an accident, he needs to have trust for his coterie mate. And that's where they left off. Dawn being dropped off at her haven with the vitae of an elder in a jar. Sam heading back home, wondering if that was really the best idea. I'm very interested in seeing what happens in the next story. What happens the next night. We should have Tinia back, which is exciting. It'll be chapter 4. I wonder what's going to have the most impact. This meeting that's going to happen with the Camarilla, or what's going to happen when this group of neonates decides that they're going to try to attack the CERT base. Also, if Billy Smith is in possession of Deacon Royce's torpid corpse, how exactly are they going to wake him up so that he can be there to assist Merrick? The outcome of these things doesn't really sound good, but I guess we will see. Thank you for joining me with this hectic explanation of the last 2 game sessions, but it's getting tense. And I can't wait to see what happens. I am Voivode Maquette. This has been a look at my world of darkness. Thank you for joining me. Good evening.